knew I had to get to it, but I didn't really want to. And it's part of the reason why I did the show small. It's called Psalms and Suli, because we have to be a bit honest, about our experience in life. Firstly, therapists ask too many questions. That's just my opinion. Don't you think therapists are nosy? They're nosy people. I had my therapist. They ask too many questions, man. And let me swivel around. It's a sun ghetto now. Yeah, and the therapists are supposed to reduce your stress, but every time she sends me a bill, it stresses me out. So how is that working? You send me, here's your invoice, and my stress just goes up. Oh man. But honest with you, I needed the therapist. Because I really went through it a few years ago. I really went through it, and I think it started. This is where you get the truth. It started when I think my son was born. When as people we have this, like, especially as a community, fatherhood in the black community is kind of like this standard that's always been like so below. And when you have your child, you're like, I'm gonna do better, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do that. And there's always this narrative. People always say, oh, my life was great until I had you kids. So I felt this overwhelming pressure to try and be someone super and someone amazing, someone that maybe I was already, but I didn't feel like I was. And as a result of this, I started doing a lot of like desperate things in terms of like opportunities that might not be for me. I was trying to fit myself in it, trying to do these things. And at the same time, this culminated with me losing a lot of people. And when I say losing a lot of people, one of the things that really hurts me is betrayal. I lost friends. I had people that stole money from me or took money from me. I had people that I trusted. I'd really invested so much in them, and they all let me down. And this all culminated at the same point in time. And one thing about when you're breaking, a man doesn't realize when he's breaking, like, until he's really broken, because we're so used to breaking. We're grown up with the idea that, you chip a bit of this arm, I'll keep it moving. You take a bit of this off. That's what we are. We're men, innit? You get what I'm saying? But I was breaking and I didn't realize it. And I started moving in desperation. I wasn't moving in purpose. I was moving in desperation. And there's a difference when you move in purpose and when you move in desperation. When you move in desperation, you make mistakes. You trust the wrong people and you lose a lot. And I remember I got to this point where I'd done all these moves, business fell through, and I remember going broke. Damn. Let me clarify this though, because I hate when people say I was broke. I was broke, but I was like middle class broke. Let's be clear. Now I'm just gonna be real with you. Like, I may not have no money in my account, but it's like, what? I know that money may come from somewhere, or I have a means of making money. I have some assets. Like middle class broke is kind of like you can sustain yourself for the next year or so. But I've been broke, where you can't sustain yourself for the next 24 hours. That's real broke, So I wasn't at that level of broke, but I was middle class broken. And what it's like to look at your bank account. I had money in my account, and to see it at zero, the pain. And I remember sending the screenshot of zero in my account to my wife, and that's how you know I was middle class broke. Nobody who's really broke, no black man that is broke with self-respect will screenshot zero in his account to his wife. Even though, my wife had access to all my accounts, so she probably saw it happen anyway. So I remember screenshotting to her, and I was like, damn, how did we get here? Well, how did I get here? She's good. And I remember she said to me, yo, check your account again. And I remember checking my account, and there was like 15K in there. And I was like, oh, Babs, you didn't have to do that. This is £15,000. I was like, oh, you don't have to do that. And she said to me, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be in a position to give you this. So I trust you, take this and do what you need to do with this. And so, and the thing is, in life, I'm a strong believer everything's about perspective. You're laughing at me because I was down on my knees. I see you cry. I was really going through it. In that life, everything's about perspective. So it's like, one man could break his foot, and he's a football player, and he could be like, oh, my foot's broken, I'm down. But the other man could be like, oh, you know what, I can work on my other foot. But at the point I was in my life, I only saw the negative. So instead of seeing that as a positive, I was like, what kind of man am I that needs his wife to lend him money? Like, full disclosure, I've only asked my wife to lend me money like once seriously in my life, and that was like back in the day when I needed like £600 for a camera, and I was so embarrassed that I wrote like a repayment plan down to the T. Like, she kept the email and she even shows it to me to this day. Like, you was really broke and you was really treating me like I was cash converters, you know what I mean? Like, this was, you know, so for that to hit me as a man, yo, that took me apart. You know, that really, really took me to a dark place, and I didn't realize the place I was going to until I was finally there. So I remember coming out of one meeting, and I was in this meeting and I was heated. I was heated in the meeting, but I didn't realize how angry I was. So I go to bed that night, and I swear I'm in the bed and I feel like I'm on fire. Like, I'm in my bed and my body is on fire. So I jump out of the bed, I throw all my clothes off, and I say to myself, oh, it must be like hot in this room, like it's hot in this room, that's cool. So I jump back into bed, and half an hour later it's I've never heard my heart beat this fast in my life. And at the time I had the Apple Watch, so you know I wasn't that broke. I started my Apple Watch. I hadn't pawned that off yet, and I put the Apple Watch, and then you lot are laughing, this shit was serious. I guess the way I struggle through it is with the humour, and I remember putting on my Apple Watch and my heart rate is just going up like crazy. So I said to my wife, there's something wrong with me. So we go to the hospital. And you know, this is around the time when COVID was at the peak. So we do the health checks and the chest scan, and we do all these things. And the guy says, I don't think there's anything wrong with you, but we're gonna have to do a couple more blood tests. And in between those blood tests, I could say it was the worst 2 weeks of my life. Because my heart, you know, when your body's in fight or flight, it doesn't listen to its mind. So every time I'd sit down, my heart would start beating. Every time I'd sit down to write, my heart would start beating. Let alone be on stage. I had to do a Zoom call and I wanted to cancel it, but I knew I needed to be there. And just being there on camera, my heart is racing out of my chest and I'm sweating and I just wanted to get out of there. And this is a man like me who steps on stage in front of people, you know what I mean? I didn't understand what was going on, and when your body's in fight and flight, what also happens is your muscles tense up. So at this point in my life, I was in my bed and I'd be getting pains in my chest, like stabbing pains, you know, at the back of my neck, in my shoulders, and I literally thought I was dying. Like, I literally felt like I was in hell every single evening. And it kind of got to a place where I spoke to a therapist and she said to me, I think you're experiencing grief. And I said, but obviously I knew someone that had died, but it wasn't. She said, people can grieve not just the loss of a person, but the loss of opportunity, the loss of things they care about. You know, I was supposed to do this massive show in Brixton, and that got cancelled a long time earlier. And all those things have kind of culminated, and my body was attacking me. Boy. And I remember sometimes I'd go running in the morning, and I just start screaming. Like, I live in a big like field, wherever there's lots of fields, and I'll be running in the morning, and I'll just be screaming like, what's wrong with me? Do you know how hard it is to tell a man that relies on his mind that his mind is letting him down? That's my only, I said, I may not be 6 foot tall, you know, I may not be tall, dark and handsome, but I've always said I've got this up here, and now I didn't even have that. And I remember having to sit down, and I said to myself, you know, thank God for my family, you know, I said to myself, I have to figure this out. You know, because every morning I was still taking my son to nursery, and the fact that he didn't care whether I was superhero, I was in pain, and he just wanted his dad to take him to nursery, that helped me a lot. And that was the first kind of like victory, just getting to nursery to every single day. And then the next step, I remember I had to sit down and write. Oh shit, you know how hard was it? I've been writing my whole life. I sit in front of the laptop and my heart is beating out of my chest, me, Suli Breaks. And I remember saying to myself, I was typing, I had to sit down and start typing, and I said to myself, listen, either I die here physically, or I die forever emotionally and creatively, and I can't do that, because that's the only thing I have left, that ability to create. So I started writing, going through that, and I started praying. You know, I'd pray, I'd be in tears on the floor, you know, because I'd have nightmares. Every night I'd wake up at exactly the same time, like 2 p.m. And I don't even want to describe the nightmares. Those shits were vivid, man. And I'd pray. And then I started to study about the mind. I started to study and I started to learn. And then I understood something. This was the turning point for me. When I understood that every opportunity that I created in my life, it started from within here. All the people I've touched, all the venues I've done, all the poems I've written, it started from within here. And the value of what's in here is exponential. So everything out here shouldn't be able to affect it. As they say, if a man has no enemy within, the enemy on the outside can do him no harm. And I had to internalize that. I had to internalize that. And I say to myself, I had to look in the mirror, you know. My wife calls me the machine, not for the reasons that you think. She calls me the machine because whenever she asks me, am I nervous? I say, how can I be nervous? I don't have blood that runs through my veins, it's oil. I'm the brakes machine, you know what I mean? And she calls me the machine. And I had to look in the mirror and I had to say to myself, listen, I wasn't born Suli Breaks. I made him. And if he's broken, then I have to rebuild him, you know? And it was step by step, day by day. This was like 6 months. Every night before I went to sleep, I had to do a body scan. A body scan is when you breathe in, breathe out, feel your head, cranial, all that shit. I had to do it every single night. I had to wake up at 4 a.m., pray, then meditate. I had to do all that stuff, and gradually I started to remember who I was. And I realized it was never about going outside or trying to solve this problem. That I know it was about fixing what was in here and remembering who I was. And I reminded myself who I was bit by bit, and I started writing. I started creating. You know, I started getting on stage little bits here and there, and I started to feel like myself again. And when you feel like yourself, you know, the universe responds, you know. The universe starts to respond, because I said to myself, listen, either we die here in this hole or we climb out of it and continue towards the mountain. So I kept on towards the mountain, and the universe started to respond. So, you know, then the money starts to come in, you know, you get a little, you get a little 5K, you get a little 5K check here, a little 10K, 20K, you know, the universe started to respond. And I remember a real significant moment after like this period of like a year, you know, prayer, God is my witness, when we had an opportunity come in. So my wife normally vets most of the opportunities before we get someone else to deal with it. And they came in for like a decent amount of money, you know. I remember it was like, I'm just gonna say, it was like 40K, yeah. So they came in, cool, it was a decent amount of money. And I said to my mom, you know, I said to my wife, you know, so I remember who I am right now, Jonathan. I said, if these people can come in for 40, I'm sure they can come in for more. So my wife looks at me, you know, reluctantly, you know. She looks at me reluctantly, and she goes, all right, cool, I'll send them the email. So she sends the email, you know, and they come back and they say, okay, cool, you know what? We don't mind re-up and we can do the deal for 70K. And I was like, 70K sounds decent, but I remember who I am. That's the difference, you know what I'm saying? You don't know who Suli Breaks, I remember who I am. I remember who I am, I ain't forgotten who I am. So I said to her, listen, like, Babs, it's a decent amount, but I feel like if we told them we could do this, that, you know, we can actually re-up, we can get the deal further. And my wife was like to me, no. And I said, you know, and God is my witness, she's always trusted me, so she sends the email out to them. Then it's radio silence. You know when you're refreshing your inbox, like, you're refreshing your inbox, and she's looking at me like, and I'm thinking that I just fumbled a nice bag. But you know what I said to myself? I created that in here. If I created it once, I can create it again. That's the only way that this thing goes. So I remember that. And I remember the day they emailed me back. And my wife calls me. She goes, yo, check your email. So I check the email. I open the contract. It says, oh, we really love what you proposed. So we can give you like 100K to do this. Come on. Yeah, come on. I remembered who I was. And she said to me, they said we can give you 100K to do this, and then we'll do another 100K. So in total, the entire deal will be 200K in it. So I was, I remember, and you know the first thing I did, I called my wife back. You know the first thing I said to her? I said, if they can do 200K, I'm sure they can do a bit more. Hey, she always killed me when she sent that email back. But God as my witness, you know. The deal ended up coming to like close to $250,000, you know what I mean? So we thank God. Then I remember going into my room, and this wasn't about the money. I remember going into my room, and there was this speech that I used to listen to on repeat. There's a speech by T.D. Jakes. I came across it, but it's a speech called "Keep the Faith," you know. And I remember being on my bedroom floor. And I just started crying, you know what I mean? Because I felt like in the midst of hell, I was able to remind myself of who I was. And I think sometimes no matter what a man is going through, if you remember who you are, That's the most important thing, you know. We're all born as children, you know, we go through all these experiences, you know. But that innocence, that creative power we have, we should never forget it. We need to learn to harness it, you know. And I remember I'm on the floor crying, you know, and my wife comes into the room and I'm sitting in the dark and she puts her hand on my shoulder and she says, "You remember you still owe me 15K, right?" No, she didn't say that, but you know, it's, and I remember listening to the speech by T.D. Jakes, and it says, it's an urge